guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Callie, and today, because it's February, I'm going to go through some of my favorite romance books. Now, all these are listed as romance as the main genre, but I have a couple that dip into fantasy, historical fiction. Majority of these are contemporary romance though. So the first one I'm going to talk about is actually one of my more recent reads, and that is Rhapsodic by Thalassa. This is an urban fantasy, so it takes the concepts of fantasy elements but within a modern setting, and I really like that. One of the first books I read with that was Crescent City, and I think it's just a fun way to have like all these creatures using cell phones and the internet. I think it's a good time. So we're following our main character, who is Callie, who is a siren, and she makes a deal with a bargainer when she's caught in a tough spot. And we kind of follow this dual timeline where when she first meets the bargainer and 7 years after. And I really liked this. The romance was great. It wasn't necessarily the plot, but it was, the plot heavily influenced the romance, and I really liked it. It was really cool. It had a lot of elements from Crescent City that I really liked. The romance was just so tense and really well written, and the guy has bat wings, so that's kind of cool. That was really interesting. I'm super intrigued as to where this is going. These are all adult books. I would highly recommend, if any of these interest you, to check trigger warnings for any of these, because all of these, most of these have pretty heavy trigger warnings on them, so bear that in mind. One of those is Gild by Raven Kennedy. This is another fantasy romance where we're following a girl named Orin who is literally gold. Her skin, everything about her is gold. She is King Midas's pet and his favored because she's gold. Now, book one is my least favorite. I am fully caught up on this series. This is a quartet with, I think, the last book coming out in May. So I've read Glint and Gleam. Those two were so worth the shitstorm that is this first book. And I don't mean that it wasn't a bad book, but Orin is very frustrating. There are a lot of toxic relationships within this book. There are a lot of heavy themes of abuse, both physical and psychological. So reading that, it was rough, but it does set up a lot of really interesting relationships, discussions that happen in the later books. I really enjoyed this. The romance is great once you get to it, which isn't really until book 2 and 3, but very much like ACOTAR, you gotta have patience with romances like this, and this one, it is worth it. Moving away from fantasy and more into the contemporary era, I couldn't have this list without having a Colleen Hoover book, and the one that I chose was Ugly Love, because I've only read a couple of Colleen Hoover books, and this one is, when I think of a romance, this is the one that I think of. It is more geared towards fiction, but romance is a very heavy element within this story. So in this one, we're following two people. We're following a pilot, and then we're following his neighbor's younger sister who had to move into this. Essentially, it's a building full of flight attendants and pilots, and it's just a nice little place for them to congregate when they're actually home. And they develop feelings for each other, and he's got 2 rules. Don't get attached, don't ask about my past, and of course she listens to none of those rules. And what I liked about this book is he didn't follow his own rules, and watching him kind of unravel, and you figure out why he doesn't talk about his past, why he doesn't like to get attached, becomes truly heartbreaking. And I think that Colleen Hoover is very good at writing these heartbreaking romances and fantastic character arcs. This is all character driven. The plot is mainly the romance, and it was fantastic. I loved every second of this book. Next I have Actor Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. I would recommend any of these books. The Brown Sisters is a fantastic romance companion trilogy, whatever you want to call it. All of them are fantastic. Eve Brown for me was my favorite. And in each one of these books, you're following one of the Brown sisters as they try and actually prioritize relationships and love within their lives. They are all very career driven. Not to say that that's a bad thing, but they start to almost lose sight of things that are important. You know, just making money isn't necessarily important. And in this one, Eve is actually the mess of the family, and she ends up accidentally running over this bed and breakfast owner, and she feels so bad that she basically offers herself a job to help him out while he heals. And our romance kind of springs from there. This one it's so cute. The couple has fantastic banter throughout the entire story. They were adorable and I loved them. Up next I have The Roommate by Rosie Dannon. I really like this one because it's very out there for a romance. This is another contemporary romance. We're following Clara, who basically drops her heiress life in the East Coast to follow a boy to the West Coast. And when he immediately rejects her, she's trapped. She has no way of how to sustain herself, hold a job, and do anything of that. So she is able to stay at a friend's house while they're away, I think on like a filming shoot because she's in LA. She ends up meeting her friend's roommate, who is a male porn star. And there are so many things that I wasn't prepared for that were just so interesting. It's very hard to explain, but this book was really well done. I really liked just the dynamic, the uncomfortableness that happened as a theme throughout the entire story. And it was just a fun, cute little romance. Up next, I have Neon Gods by Katee Robert. This is, I don't know if this is considered a fantasy romance because I don't think there's really fantasy elements. But I also don't think it's considered a contemporary romance either. I have no idea what category to put this in. But this is a Hades and Persephone retelling, but the way that the Hades, Zeus, all of that, they are titles, not their names. So they're almost like mob bosses, and their title is the Zeus, the Hades, the Hera, all of that kind of stuff. They aren't the actual gods. And we follow the tale of Persephone and Hades, which is a very popular story that I'm seeing a lot come about, but they're all really good and I'm enjoying this one. This one has a lot of that mob romance, which I've actually never read a mob romance, so I don't really know how accurate that is. But the dynamic between Hades and Persephone was so different from the other ones that I've read, so this was able to stand out a lot. And I think Electric Idol just dropped, which is a continuation of this series, but I think that one is Eros and Psyche. So I am very intrigued to pick up and continue in this world because I think it's going to be really interesting to see how she keeps warping these gods. Moving back into contemporary romance, I have two Helena Hunting books, which are my two favorites. I have The Good Luck Charm and Kiss My Cupcake. The Good Luck Charm is probably my favorite of all of Helena Hunting's books. We're following, this is a second chance romance, which I don't read very often because it's just not a common trope. So these two were a couple before the guy went off to the NHL and he dumped her while he was on the road trying to better his career. And they finally are able to reconnect and he kind of treats her as his good luck charm. He starts to do well in his career again, but he's afraid that their past is going to catch up with them. And this has a lot of good discussion of healthy relationships and communication. There is the miscommunication trope within this, but it's done in a way that doesn't physically aggravate me. And I really enjoyed that. It was great. Now this one was just so cute not to include. We're following these neighbor small business owners. She has just opened a boozy bakery, essentially, and he owns an axe throwing bar right next door. And they start to kind of build this animosity because of the axe throwing. It's starting to like rattle her walls and it's not the aesthetic that she's going for. He thinks that she's just annoying and makes boozy cupcakes, which she does. But their romance was so cute and they actually end up teaming up together to go for this competition of like the best small business. and it's really cute. They almost like team up even though they're going against each other. And I loved it. It was wholesome and adorable, and I need some of the recipes for her boozy cupcakes because they sounded amazing. Another author that I really, really like is Tessa Bailey, and I picked It Happened One Summer, which is actually my more recent read from her, where this is, it's supposed to be similar to Schitt's Creek, which actually I've never watched, but this heiress basically gets cut off and sent to this little fishing town in Alaska, and she meets this boatman. And they have just they butt heads constantly. She's trying to find things to do to rebuild her day. She finds out that her father used to own a bar that's just kind of gone downhill, essentially. So she decides to try and rebuild that, and while also trying to get to know the culture of the people here. And in that, she gets closer to this widower. It's so sweet, and it was very well done. I loved this. We got a lot of really good tropes, the almost enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, a lot of really good banter. And it's definitely one of the more favorite romances that I've read recently. I have one historical fiction romance on here that I really like, and that is Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. This is a late 19th century romance where Annabelle has joined the suffragette movement, and her friends are trying to convince this very powerful duke to help them. So she ends up going, and her original plan backfires because she was trying to more get him on their side and not necessarily woo him, and all these other things start cropping up, and our romance kind of goes down from there. I've read the entire series that's out, at least, which is Bringing Down the Duke, A Rogue of One's Own, and Portrait of a Scotsman. Books 1 and 3 are probably the best. Book 2 was really boring in my opinion. It didn't really focus on the romance, which is what I really expected after reading this one. But then Portrait of a Scotsman kind of goes back to that template. But these are really fun. You get to see the suffragette movement like move forward throughout these books. It's really cool to just watch these women while wanting to fall in love, wanting to keep their independence, because in this time period, once you got married, you became your husband's property. And a lot of these women draw issue from that, which is fair. And watching them try and solve these problems, and then watching their husbands or paramours, whatever you want to call them, start to help them and understand their plights is really fascinating to watch unfold. The last one that I have is back to contemporary, and that is Well Met by Jen DeLuca. This is again, contemporary romance where we are following a Ren Fair. We're following this girl who has been living with her sister and her teenage daughter because her sister was in a really bad accident, and her life was kind of falling apart as it was. So to spend more time with her sister and her niece, she decides to move up there, and her niece really wants to be a part of this Ren Fair but needs an adult to join her. So she ends up joining this Ren Fair, and she starts to ask questions and come up with better ways to advertise or things they can change. And the guy who runs the Ren Fair is very hesitant to change. So they end up working together a lot because she is very bullheaded and she wants her ideas heard. But since she's new in town, a lot of people aren't listening to her ideas, especially him. And it's really sweet how everything unfolds and how everything is revealed within this story. I think that the Ren Fair background was one of the most romantic settings and was just so cute, and I lived for this romance. I am ready to continue reading from these little stories. I think the next one's Well Played that I'm gonna try and read later this month, but they're all really cute. If you've ever been to a Ren Fair, it was fairly accurate to what you experience there. And it was kind of cool to see like what the author, I assume the author did her research, and this is actually kind of how the background works for a Ren Fair. If not, well, I have this idea of how a Ren Fair works. But it was really cute, really well done romance, and definitely one of my new favorites. So I'm fairly new to the romance genre. I'm still trying to piece together what kind of tropes, what kind of romances that I enjoy. So So I have a fair amount of differentiation. I do really like the fantasy ones, like Rhapsodic and Gild. So I plan on getting to Zodiac Academy. That one's pretty high up on my list. I definitely want to finish the Well Met series, which I actually still think is going on. And I have so many just favorite authors from picking up romance books. Helena Hunting, Talia Hibbert, Tessa Bailey, just to name a few. And it's just a fun journey to be going on. And with it being February, I figured I would share some of my favorites with you. If you have recommendations, let me know down below in the comments. I know Brittany and I love romance. We give each other recommendations all day long. We're trying to pull Sarah into the romance a little bit. I've bullied her into reading Well Met this month, so really excited to hear her thoughts on that. And that's going to be it for today's video. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We post every Tuesday, Thursday, with the occasional Sunday. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!